In a landmark ruling today, a judge said prosecutors will be allowed to introduce evidence that was gleaned from hairs that were found on the Gilgo victims' remains. That evidence was obtained through whole genome sequencing. And that's a first for New York. And it brings me back to the murder of little JonBenet Ramsey in Boulder, Colorado. John Ramsey, JonBenet's dad, has been relentless in his belief that advances in DNA technology will ultimately find his daughter's killer. And John Ramsey joins me now live. John, it's good to have you on the show again. Thanks for being here. I thought of you. Listen, today, immediately, I thought about you when the judge in the Long Island serial killing case said, okay, whole genome sequencing, it's in. So what was your reaction to that?
Well, you know, I had to study it a little bit to understand. I've been pushing forensic genetic genealogy research in our case for a while. And basically, it requires a different set of data than has been put into CODIS, which is a federal database. CODIS has 15 or 20 markers. If you match the markers, you're the bad guy. If you don't, you're out. There's no way to research genealogy and track this genealogy research program with that data. You've got to have this new data taken, new samples taken. And the way what has happened so far with these cases where old cold cases have been solved is they've used this technique of genome sampling and then built a family tree using usually the mother side of the family. And they go back and create a family tree going back X number of years, depending on how old the case is. And then they look who the relatives were. And there's in the first case that this was solved was a Golden State Killer case in California. And it was a 40-year-old case, cold case. Well, they found this guy that was a relative in the town where this crime was committed 40 years ago. Then they went and got his DNA, and the DNA matched the sample they have. And so, bingo, they found the killer. So it's a huge advance, and I believe it's the way our case will be solved. I think it's a really good chance it could be solved if it's implemented. I learned recently that yes, you can get this data from a hair sample. We have several hair samples from JonBenet's crime scene that weren't identified. We donated hair and pubic hair. There's a pubic hair sample in JonBenet's blanket. Not linked to anybody at this point. We know you can get a sample from that now. I've heard that before, and of course heard it in your program. So it's a huge tool to identify killers.
Let me ask you this. Given the
I thought we already talked about the pubic sample. I thought we already talked about that. I thought that was attributed to someone else that was family related. No. That was like an auxiliary hair or something like that. It was like Patsy or Melinda's or something like that. It was something like that. But that wasn't. We've talked about that. I thought we cleared that up. See, this is my problem. This kind of stuff goes on in their book, The Death of Innocence. We have already talked about this. We have already cleared it up. That isn't what you think it is. It's something else. And they keep saying, if you were to say, look, this is what they've been saying, I don't believe that. I believe it's something different, then that would be different. But if you're telling me that we have not looked into it before, why are you saying that? Because we have looked into it before. I'm going to let the video finish before I Continue.
The fact that this whole genome sequencing is good enough to identify a 9/11 victim, right, from 24 years ago. And now the standard is being accepted in this massive case, the serial killer case in New York. I know that you've been meeting with the Boulder police about genetic genealogy, but do you think it might be worth going back and knocking on the door and saying, hey, look what they're doing in New York. What about this whole genome sequencing? Why don't we go this route as well?
Yeah, and we should. And I have another meeting set up with the chief of police. I've met with him in January. I've got another meeting in a week or so. And that's my message. We've got to use this technique. I firmly believe that it'll solve the case. If we do it and we don't get a solution, then by gosh, I'll give you guys credit. You did everything that technically can be done today. But it's a huge advance in the use of DNA technology. The last.
No, you won't. No, you won't. You will not give the police credit, because if you were going to give the police credit, you would have already done that with the current testing that is out there. I don't think that John knows what he's talking about here. I think, and this is not being disrespectful, I think that John has not researched this. I think he's still thinking about genetic genealogy. I think, or forensic gene. I think he's still thinking about that. Like, he's still thinking about that method. It's a completely different method. I think he's still thinking about that. And that's why he's talking about that. I don't think he's researched this, either that or because he seems to be kind of like stumbling a little bit to get to the point in terms of is he for this or is he not for this? Of course, you might say, oh, yep, he said he wanted to do it. Yes, when pressed. But what I'm looking for is more tenacity, I guess, around this. Are you attacking the case? Are you hungry about finding this killer in your child's case? And that, I guess, that's what I'm looking for. And, he's kind of reserved on this, to be honest. He's kind of nonchalant a little bit. And I'm a little surprised, because from what I researched, and we'll talk about that here in a second, from what I was looking at, this thing could blow the case wide open. I mean, like, really shake some things up. For real. He doesn't seem excited about that. That's what's throwing me off. Like, you should be like, oh, really? Tell me more about that. Oh, I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. We could use that. And I could specifically see where it could be used here and there. That's what I'm not getting. There's no excitement. He's just kind of like, oh, well, there's genetic genealogy. Yeah, John, we're past that. We have something better. What do you think about that? What do you think about that, working in your case? And John just...
The last DNA testing in our case was done about 8 or 9 years ago. Technology has advanced dramatically. This is a great example of that. And
is it ever?
It's an amazing tool. And
so
the difference that this tool provides is the ability to use DNA information to investigate a case. We've used DNA as a country evidence to convict. DNA matches, boom, we got you. Doesn't match, you're out. That's a pretty primitive use of DNA in today's world.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download.
Wait a minute. Like, we use the same thing. We do the same thing. Okay. Well, John doesn't know, because he just repeated himself. He just said, we use DNA this way, and if it catches the bad guy, boom, you're out. We know that if the DNA points to them, they're not going to accept it. There's not going to be a boom, you're out. We talked about that before with Patsy's response and stuff like that. God rest her soul. We've talked about that with Patsy when Detective I think it's Detective Tom Haney asked her specifically if these fingerprints on this pineapple bowl come back to being you, what would you say? She said, "Oh, it ain't me." Well, what if it came back to be somebody else? Well, then it's them. So we have to have some sort of baseline or established ground to understand what about this DNA can constitute uh, the bad guy, according to John. So let me see. I have just for our remembrance. So I was like, hey, what is this genome? And I just have it in my notes down here. What is this genome sequencing thing? We've seen this before. So, feel free to look away if you want to. But I'm going to have it to kind of talk about some stuff. So, what is genome sequencing? WGS. So, whole genome sequencing is a laboratory method that determines the entire DNA sequence of an individual's genome, all 3 billion base pairs. Unlike targeted genetic testing, which looks at specific genes or regions, WGS captures everything, including coding and non-coding regions. This makes it the most comprehensive form of DNA testing. So now we might ask, how does this whole genome testing or sequencing relate to standard genetic DNA testing? So when you think about the traditional forensic DNA testing like STP analysis used in CODIS, it focuses on short tandem repeats. That's STR. We talked about that, and I think they have it here. This is what Bodie did. The evidence, kind of right here, if you can see it. The evidence items were processed for DNA typing by analysis of the 13 CODIS short tandem repeat loci. And so that's the kind of method. And they said we did it by scientific working group on DNA analysis methods and adopted as federal standards. We did it by those. So traditional forensic DNA testing like STB used in CODIS focuses on short tandem repeats at specific loci, usually 13 to 20 markers. It is excellent for identification, but doesn't reveal health or ancestry. Okay. Genetic DNA testing like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA usually examines hundreds of thousands of SNPs, which are also what the formal is single nucleotide polymorphisms, single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, giving insights into ancestry, some traits, and sometimes health risks. Whole genome sequencing goes far beyond both, right? It goes far beyond both. It includes every SNP, and that's the single nucleotide polymorphism or the single tandem repeats. It goes far beyond these. It includes these, and it includes every SNP, STR, and mutation across the genome. In a forensic context, it allows for identifying extremely degraded or mixed DNA samples. It allows for extracting far more markers than CODIS allows. It allows for using investigative genetic genealogy, comparing unknown DNA to large consumer databases to find relatives, and it allows for potentially resolving cases where conventional testing couldn't separate contributors. And that's the problem here. A lot of times is you couldn't get separate contributors. You see things like included, excluded, cannot be included or excluded. Contains a mixture of at least 2 individuals, contains a mixture of at least 3 individuals, a mixture of at least 2, including a major component of the victim and 1 additional minor. It's supposed to help sort of disaggregate that, okay, from what I'm reading. So we can kind of get a better sense of, okay, if we're talking about a minor, who is it? This is what I want to see. That's what I want to see. Who is that? Who is that? And at least 1 minor. I know there are rumblings of Doug Stein out there and stuff like that. I haven't found any information on that, but they could bring him in and test him, and say, hey, Doug, we didn't get your DNA down the first time. You mind coming in so we could test you the second time? They could test him. But I'm interested in that. Who is a minor? But the minor contributor is low level, contains allelic dropout, and therefore is not suitable for comparison. From what I understand, and we'll keep reading, from what I understand to learn more about this, that can pick this up and test whether it's just noise or whether that's really something. Like if that's associated with JonBenet or if that's associated with somebody else. So anyways, let's keep going. In terms of its application to the JonBenet Ramsey case, the JonBenet case still has DNA at the center of the controversy. STR testing over the years has pointed to an unknown male DNA, but questions remain about whether the samples are mixtures contaminated or partial. Here's how, this whole genome sequencing could help out the case. You have something like mixture resolution. WGS can sometimes deconvolute mixed DNA samples better than STR methods, like we just said about this. We can kind of disaggregate. If you're looking at 2 or 3, that's what it can do. That's what it's supposed to be able to do. That's what it's saying. That's what it's claiming to do. Better than STR, potentially clarifying the unknown male DNA and if it really belonged to a single individual. Now, this is something that I think 9 News was really hot under the collar about. They were jumping up and down about this, and they were trying to send a message to DA Lacey before she exonerated the Ramsey, saying, hey, you need to slow down before you try to exonerate someone. You can't make a decision because this could be a mixture of several people. You cannot go off of that. You cannot exonerate them just yet. And so this will tell us if this person, this unknown person, is even real. Okay. Familial searching and genealogy. With full genomes, investigators could upload the S&P data into genealogical databases, similar to how the Golden State Killer was identified. That's what John was mentioning. Similar to how the Golden State Killer was identified. And that might allow them to identify relatives of any unknown contributor. So what that means is, when I say I want to know who this is, this additional minor, if it's not background or low level noise, if we pull something, we can send that to somebody like a CC Moore or somebody and say, hey, look, I need you to find the genealogy of this person. Limit it for me. That's all I need you to do, baby. I just need you to limit it for me. Limit it down to a family. Limit it down to a certain lineage. That's what I want you to do, and I can do the work from there. Oh, man. And we can do the work from there. So, anyways, reanalysis of degraded DNA. WGS is sensitive enough to sometimes recover signals from degraded or low quality DNA that older methods have missed. They talked about the degraded DNA under her fingernails, right? And so maybe, well, no. Well, I don't know what if I don't know what they did with it. Maybe there was some way that we captured it. Maybe not. I don't know. But that would be my first thought, that we could kind of use that for that. And so some challenges to prior conclusions. If WGS shows the DNA profiles previously reported were actually mixtures or artifacts, it could change the weight given to the intruder DNA theory. So it could shift how we think about the intruder. If there's an intruder, if there's no intruder, what direction, it can give us a better sense of what direction we need to be looking in, right? So to kind of close that point out, in short, the whole genome sequencing could help settle disputes about whether the DNA on JonBenet's clothing is a valid single profile or just contamination. And it could open the door to genetic genealogy searching for suspects or relatives. And I love this part because if we go this method, then we can kill two birds with one stone. Sorry, birds. We can take out two birds with one stone. Let me say that. Why? Because we can clarify and intensify the validity of our findings, and then we can also get genealogical information to circle around. If we're looking at Mervyn, if we're looking at Santa Bill, if we're looking at Linda, if we're looking at any of these people that are on this list, Doug, Susan, Glenn, Roxy, Judith Phillips. I mean, the list goes on. Well, you know, we gotta watch ourselves, because just the money. We'll talk about the money later. The key pieces that we think that give us intuition, we could retest those and say yes or no with a little bit more clarity. Okay, so what do we mean? Because I saw a point here that kind of confused me, and it may confuse you too. When they said, if WGS shows the DNA profiles previously reported were actually mixtures or artifacts. What do we mean by actual fixtures or artifacts? So a true DNA profile, which is a real fixture in the sample, this means that the DNA signal comes from an actual biological contributor, blood, skin cells, saliva, etc. The alleles, the repeats at each STR locus or SNPs in sequencing are consistent, reproducible, and form a coherent profile. Right? So we can kind of say, okay, a real fixture is like a real actual biological contributor, not just a minor or a male or someone. We can say, yeah, no, this is an actual contributor or a mixture of two people. We can kind of, again, separate that and say, okay, we're talking about JonBenet and we're talking about another individual. This individual is a male. We can get a little bit more clarity on that, and a little bit more information about their ancestry or some of their traits, their personal traits that we might need. For example, if DNA from one person is on JonBenet's clothing, you should see a clear set of alleles at each locus that match a single individual. In terms of, and that's in terms of fixtures, when we said the word fixtures. Now, in terms of the word artifacts or errors or misleading signals, artifacts are signals that look like DNA results, but don't represent a real person's genetic material. They often show up when you have a low copy number DNA. Very small amounts of DNA are amplified, which can cause allelic dropout, such as missing alleles, or allelic drop in, extra alleles not really there. You have something called stutter peaks. PCR replication sometimes creates echoes of the real allele. A repeat that's 1 unit shorter or longer. You have mixtures. When DNA from multiple people is present, the software may overcall or undercall peaks, and software does this, leading to something that looks like an unknown male but is actually background noise. And that's what I'm interested in understanding, because when the Denver PD pulled this unknown male DNA profile, you know, in The Death of Innocence, John and Patsy just championed that. They ran with it and wouldn't let it go, even though the 2008 information, the same 2008 report that exonerated them, also could not find, you know, the consistency of the unknown male DNA in some of those critical areas that we talk about, or at least in the bloomies. I think they were still found, from what I can understand, it was still found on the long johns, which in and of itself is interesting, because it helps you. Like, if I say there's an unknown male DNA on the long johns, we just cannot understand the context of it, just because of the allelic drop in or drop out, the noise, just because of the noise, right? All these things that we talk about, contamination seems to be a real big issue. And supposedly this, you know, whole genome sequencing can break all that up for us. and kind of break through the noise there. So in terms of contamination, lab handling or old methods might introduce DNA fragments from investigators or other sources. So we can kind of break through and say, oh, that's because, some of the questions are, oh, how do we know that this doesn't belong to the cops and this and that? Okay, so we should be able to break through that, right? We should say, oh, this belongs to this cop or this, right? That's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. Doesn't matter. Why this matters for the Ramsey case. So the central debate is whether the unknown male DNA on JonBenét's clothing represents a true contributor, which would be a fixture, an actual biological contributor, which is a single real person whose DNA was present from an interaction, possibly the perpetrator, or an artifact, such as a mixture, which could be background noise, contamination, or a composite of several partial contributors that doesn't necessarily reflect any single individual, which is what 9 News was trying to stop Mary Lacey and say, hey, this could be sort of a composite. Okay. And so kind of moving forward, if we think about WGS, and I think my next question related to this, and this is why I bring this up. When we look at stuff like this and we say, okay, in terms of the long johns, we have Burke and Patsy cannot be included or excluded. We have the mixture of at least 2 people here with the minor, and then we have a mixture of 3 people here. And then I think this top one is the unknown male intruder on the other report. And then we go down here to the Barbie nightgown and we say Burke and Patsy cannot be excluded. And then we say Burke and Patsy cannot be included or excluded. I'm gonna call it iffy. I call it iffy, iffy results. And then we go down here to another part of the nightgown. Burke and Patsy cannot be included or excluded. And we go to another part of the nightgown. I think it's the back, interior and exterior. Burke cannot be included or excluded. And then we go down to the long johns again, but with respect to the unknown male, and the unknown male cannot be excluded as a possible contributor. The second point from above, which we had problems with, we talked about this before. The unknown male cannot be included or excluded at this point. And you have at least, 2 individuals here, potentially including the unknown male. Okay, so I wanted to know, given all of that, where does that leave us? That was my question about this. So when we talk about what cannot be included or excluded, when a lab says someone cannot be included or excluded, or cannot be excluded as a contributor, it doesn't mean that they're actually present in the sample. It could mean, according to this, there are alleles that overlap between the person's DNA and the evidence profile, but there aren't enough unique alleles to either firmly include them or firmly exclude them. Okay? Often this happens with low-level mixtures or degraded samples. So we could be talking about a very degraded crime scene in terms of DNA sampling. And the WGS would give us more information on if we're talking about just how, degraded this crime scene, how contaminated this crime scene was. It can give us more information on that. Is it contaminated beyond any possibility of even if we run WGS or any other DNA sequence, is it just too contaminated? And if it's too contaminated, then, it gives us a little bit more information, right? It gives us information of true intent, that somebody truly and intentionally tried. It gives us stronger, I think, confirmation that somebody really tried to erase. This wasn't just somebody that, JonBenet screamed and they got scared. No, they didn't. They stayed around. They did what they needed to do to her. And they stayed around and they had time to make sure that the crime scene was cleaned up, so that you have a lot of contamination and a lot of low level DNA in mixtures and degraded samples. So iffy points here, as I described, are classic ambiguous mixture results, and they don't carry the same evidentiary weight as like a clean match or a clean exclusion. And so this could tell us, hey, you're dealing with a crime scene, which, I mean, obviously we'd still have to look after that, right? We'd still have to keep looking. But anyways, second point, how new sequencing can help us resolve these iffy results. Included, excluded, how can we move past, how can we put somebody in a bucket or in this bucket or in another bucket, okay? Whole genome sequencing is far more sensitive and precise than the older short tandem repeat method based PCR testing. And so it can help us by giving us greater marker depth. So instead of looking at 13 to 20 STRs like we would in this forensic testing, instead of just 13 to 20 short tandem repeats, WGS can look at millions of these SNPs. That gives much more resolution when deciding whether a contributor is real or just statistical overlap. And what that means is, if you guys understand, if we think about pixels and stuff like that, the more pixels, the better the picture, right? So that's why you want to see something like a 1080p or like a 720 or a 1080, and the resolution just keeps going higher. More little dots and more little pixels in a picture, we get more detail of what we're looking at. So you might get ultra high definition, where you can kind of see everything about a person's face. You can see all the way down to some mark on their face that, you couldn't see on 720 because it's, less pixels. So apparently we're going from this. Think about it this way. Think about watching movies in the 90s. Think about a broadcast in the 90s or the 80s or even the 70s. And you look at that same program today, if they remaster it, and you will see a lot more clarity in that. And what this is saying is that, over the years, if we go from the 70s to the 90s, we can see a change. Yeah, cool. I can see a change. But essentially what we're saying is we're going from the 70s all the way to the year 3000. That's the level of clarity that this is supposed to be giving us, going from 12 to 13 STRs to now millions of SNPs, millions of data points, millions, if we put it in terms of the TV picture, millions of pixels, more detail in a picture. If we're painting, we're giving more detail to that picture. That's what this is giving us. Okay, so this should really help us resolve some of this information that we're missing. Okay, we have mixture deconvolution. Advanced software can tease apart mixtures of 2 to 4 contributors or more. So where older testing said Burke cannot be excluded, like we just saw when it says Burke cannot be excluded, WGS might say, yes, Burke is a minor contributor at 2% of the DNA signal. So it can tell us yes, Burke, or no Burke. And if it says yes, Burke, it can say yes at this percentage. So we can know, that's low level. That's nothing. I don't know what it's for. I mean, it's low level, kind of deal. I mean, it might mean something, just depending with this case, because of the wiping. So I mean, we wouldn't be able to throw it out. We'd still have to consider it in terms of everything else, but we would really have to try harder to tease it out. But I think this would help. Or no, Burke is not present, and the overlap was a coincidence, or it was an artifact. It was just contamination or convolution or something like that. So we think about noise versus true contributors. WGS helps to eliminate the drop in or the drop out alleles, the artifacts, which means that some of those iffy results may simply just disappear as false positives. So if we go back and look and we see something like we saw here, included or excluded, and this is in terms of the unknown male DNA, this might actually drop off. Maybe it might actually drop off. And say, oh, absolutely, we actually don't see it. We actually can't replicate that. And that wouldn't be a surprise to me. It could be. I'm not saying that it will drop off, but I'm saying if it didn't drop, or if it did drop off, that wouldn't be a surprise to me. Because from what I'm reading in the 2008 report between Andy Harita and Amy JonBenet, and I think Angela Williams, they had a problem reproducing the unknown male DNA on the bloomies. So if it drops out on another place, I wouldn't be surprised. I just wouldn't. So these things might just disappear as false positives. We think about identification of minor contributors. With deeper sequencing, the additional minor could be resolved either by clarifying that it's just amplification noise, or by pulling out enough genetic information to compare against known references. I'm telling you right now. I want to know who this is. So implications for this case when we look at specific materials and stuff like that, the long john and stuff. The long john exterior top right half. When we say that older testing of the long johns, the exterior top right half of the long johns, when we say that older testing linked an unknown male, and that couldn't be excluded, WGS could confirm whether that unknown male is true, consistent, if this is a true consistent profile, or whether it's an artifact or mixture, just background noise, that looked like a contributor. It'll give us some real answers about the unknown male. When we look at the long johns, the interior top right and the left halves, these were mixtures of 2 or 3 individuals. WGS could determine whether there's a real third person in the mix, or whether those signals were background noise. So we can say, if we're thinking that, I think right here is what it's saying, a mixture of at least 3 people, we can kind of see, oh, it's actually 2 people is what that can break down. So break down to being. Okay. Moving forward, in the nightgown samples where Burke and Patsy were not excluded, and this is sort of like a classic overlap case, WGS could sharpen the picture. If they really contributed the DNA, you'd see consistent minor alleles across thousands of markers. If not, WGS would filter the overlap away and exclude them with confidence. So we could say, oh, that's just, Patsy and Burke weren't there, and we might be able to pick up somebody else in that consistently. Like I said, we might be able to pick up a Stein, or we might be able to pick up a Hoffman Pugh, or a Pugh, or a McReynolds, or something like that. We might be able to pick up some of these people, or another family member. As I'm saying, we can't just be giving people free get out of jail cards for no reason. Because you got to, stuff like this comes along. We just got to hold our horses. And so if not, WGS is going to filter the overlap away and exclude them with confidence. So in terms of strengthening or weakening conclusions it was my next question. Like, how does this strengthen or weaken that these could not be excluded kind of deal? So clean results like JonBenet being the major contributor on her own clothing, that would be reinforced. So that would give us sort of like a baseline to say, okay, this is making sense. JonBenet, we do find JonBenet's DNA on the clothing. We can reinforce that. That's not an issue, but it does give us a baseline, and it does help us out and say, this is testing correctly. If the unknown male DNA is real, WGS would make it more definitive and not less. In terms of weakening, ambiguous results like cannot be excluded or included, kind of those findings would be either dropped or artifacts as contamination or something like that, or background noise or low level information, or they would be clarified into true inclusions or exclusions. So some of those iffy points might just vanish as unreliable, or they might actually just be upgraded to a reliable inclusion. Okay. So basically, WGS would cut through all of this gray area, showing whether or not things are distinct versus not distinct. Now, my point was, could we identify the additional minor? And from what I can see, yes. If the DNA is real and not just, stochastic noise, like stuff like we said, that background noise, it could generate enough of these S&Ps to build a genealogical profile. This is big. This is really big. And we can compare it to relatives in open source databases like we did the Golden State Killer when that case was solved, and it could potentially give investigators a name or a family tree. But if it was just a trace artifact from a low template DNA or whatever, WGS might show that there's no real second or third contributor after all, even a minor contributor. So that could clarify that. But man, you know what? If that shows a minor contributor, I'm going off the rails. If it shows a minor contributor, I'm going off the rails. We need to focus on that because I need to know what that is. I need to know who that is. Because if that, man, look, I'm telling you, if that proves, but it's I can't get too excited because it's low level DNA. So it might be nothing. It might just be like latent, like picked up, background noise. So I can't get too excited because it might not be anything. But what if it is? What if it is something? If it is, we know a minor was there that night. Because I'm saying, why would you even have minor DNA on the scene? That's what I want to know. Why would you even, of course, well, let's back up. I'm getting too excited. There were kids in the house all day. They were down in the basement. That's where that could come from. All right, I get it. I'm a little less excited now because, you had the Kobe kids over all day upstairs and downstairs in the basement with the kids playing around. So that could be a minor. So if JonBenet was taken downstairs and she was rubbed against the carpet or picked up, whatever, then that stuff could be found on her garment. Yes. But it's so sparse. To me, it's almost as sparse as the unknown male DNA. From what I'm seeing here, it's almost as sparse as that. It's like it's not everywhere. It's just in some places. And that makes sense. But my question, how do we have sparse minor DNA and no DNA from John Ramsey? Because John was in the house. Come on. If John was in the house, we should see some sort of sparse DNA in the house from John, because John went downstairs and pulled up cigars, hid things in the basement, so on and so forth. We should see some. If we're picking up random minors, if this contamination is that bad in the house that we're picking up DNA or touch DNA from random minors, we can at least pick up touch DNA from somebody that lives there. So my next question was, I get it. Patsy and Burke's DNA could be low-level information, but why? Why is it there in the first place like we've talked about? So, few possible explanations. I don't think I believe all of them. Just write them down. Household contact DNA. Both Patsy and Burke would have handled JonBenet's clothing in daily life. Yeah, we get it. Burke's playing near her. Patsy doing the laundry and dressing her. This kind of incidental touch DNA can transfer and persist. Yeah. Yada, yada. Bull crap. Because if I would expect Patsy, but I wouldn't expect Burke. on certain garments because JonBenet wasn't playing. If she was wearing, supposedly, because I don't believe, and I'm not saying I'm proving this, I don't believe JonBenet was wearing that gray outfit or that white outfit with the long johns and the sequin star shirt. I don't think she was wearing that. I think she actually matched Patsy that night. That's why I wanted to get a hold of Fleet White's testimony to see maybe if he said something. We honestly need to get a hold of John Andrews' testimony to see what, well, he wouldn't know. He wouldn't know. But maybe Fleet or Priscilla. That would be good. But basically, second thing would be secondary transfer. Clothing rubbing on carpet, bedding, furniture can pick up this low-level DNA from family members. And this could explain why Burke's DNA shows up in sort of like this trace form, even if he didn't directly touch her in those areas. And then you have the testing artifacts in low-level or mixed DNA samples. You got random drop-in alleles that can overlap with a family member's profile, making it look like they might be present. And so that's the cannot be excluded problem. I don't know if I believe that, because there would have to be a series of coincidences. There would have to be a crazy amount of coincidences for this to be real to me. And I don't think there's that many coincidences. So many coincidences that we pick up a stranger's DNA, right? But we don't pick up somebody who is foreign to the house, but we don't pick up John's DNA. We pick up a kid's DNA, but we don't pick up John's DNA. And if we do pick up DNA, it's just because they may have touched her. She may have interacted with them, even though she didn't interact with them that night in those clothes. My problem is, I don't think she interacted with them in all of those clothes. That's what you would have to say. She interacted with them with the Barbie nightgown and with the sequin star shirt and with the long johns. I don't think that's the case. So this testing is needed. We talked about why Burke and not John, why Patsy makes more sense. We already know that. We've talked about that in other episodes, so I won't belabor the point there. And of course, whole genome sampling can answer if John is even in there. Maybe there's a part of John that's in there that we don't know, right? Maybe we know that John touched certain things like the tape or like the ligatures or something like that, and we could see exactly where. We could get a more of a heat map to say, okay, John's DNA was all over here. Maybe we can get a better read on those, or none at all. To really test this method, because if John is telling you, yeah, I touched it, we should see it. Okay. Sometimes, and my question became, if it went in the dryer, okay? If it went in the dryer, what's the impacts of that? And so on the dryer point, dryers can degrade, from what I can tell, from what I understand. Dryers can degrade DNA, but they don't necessarily eliminate it. So they can degrade it, but not necessarily eliminate it. So if the nightgown had been laundered before, residual DNA could remain in seams or less exposed areas. And so this iffy result might be exactly what you expect from like an old degraded DNA. But my problem with this is my response to that would be, we're not talking about less exposed areas or in the seams of the nightgown. Because yes, that might be a possibility, but we're not talking about in the seams of the nightgown. We're talking about the arms. We're talking about the front of the shirt. We're talking about the back of the shirt, inside and outside. So unless your dryer, your washer and dryer is trash, that should be washed away. Now I understand, with the not Casey, Jodi Arias. I understand what Jody Arias tried to ruin evidence, and sometimes a washer and a dryer just can't do it. Sometimes just can't do it. So I'm open to that as well. I'm open to the fact that, you know, washer and dryer in this case just didn't do it. JonBenet hadn't worn it in two weeks, or I'm sorry, 2 days at this point, and the washer and dryer just didn't take it out. Okay. So clarifying, I just want to make sure we clarify what we mean by degraded material in that regard. I'm not going to belabor that point. I did have a problem. We talked about this idea that the intruder's DNA was sparse versus some strong DNA. That could clarify that, but I'm interested to see. We really need to make a push for this. Is my point on that. But what it's going to spell out, if we keep going down this line, it's going to spell out just how much each individual was involved. And you know what would be crazy? This method could wipe away Patsy. It could wipe away Burke, and it could say it's not even a no male. That would be crazy. If we did WGS testing, whole genome sequencing, and it said no one, what would you say? What would you say? That would be crazy. That would be wild. Okay. So obviously my next question becomes about the fibers. Can it test fibers? Right. And you know what, because we talked about the black shirt and getting it down to a science where this black shirt came from. Now I can't test fibers. It's not that good to test fibers. It's just on DNA sequencing. And I just wanted to make sure, you know, but if there are, I think if there are like things like urine or saliva or something like that, or any other bodily fluids in connection to, say like JonBenet's cover, like the fecal matter, you know, and some of the saliva and some of the urine, just, I would like to test those to say, this belongs to JonBenet. On the Barbie nightgown, the urine, I would like to test that and say, this is JonBenet's. Because that would tell us that she used the restroom on herself. That would get us closer to saying she used the restroom on herself that night. These covers that are removed from her bed, if this is JonBenet's urine, then she used the restroom on herself in this nightgown on this bed. If this fecal matter is JonBenet's on this comforter, she may have had a little problem. And that would mean, that would solidify some of our theories of saying JonBenet didn't just stay asleep that night. She used the restroom on herself. We know for sure. Almost certain. And if that's the case, then we got to ask some questions about, well, either you knew JonBenet got up, or JonBenet just got up and you didn't know it, and she was wandering around, and the perpetrator just so happened to see her and pick her up and said, hey, what are you doing downstairs, little girl? You shouldn't be here. Pick up. Basically a case of wrong place, wrong time kind of deal. So I wanted to know a cost, because there's this new testing method. So we got the whole genome sequencing, but there's also this new testing method. Let me find it in my notes for fiber testing. It's a new method. Well, it's called Raman spectroscopy. Raman spectroscopy. Now, if we're looking at costs for the Ramseys, from a top-notch lab, we would have a good amount of clothing we would be looking at, let me see where my clothing is. Because I'm thinking we have, where is it in my notes? We have the long johns, the bloomies, the nightgown, JonBenét's covers, John and Patsy's clothes, and what we really need to do is try to find Burke's clothes. That's what we really need to do. Burke's clothes, well, we might be out of luck there. Burke's clothes, to try to test with a method called the Raman spectroscopy. And I think that's down here a little bit lower in my notes. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But nevertheless, some of the stuff is kind of expensive. And I'm not going to go through all of the costs that I would think we would outline here. Because if I were to say, if we're going to do it, I would do the whole genome sequencing, but I would also do this new fiber. Because, no, you know what? I should probably say something about it. I should probably say something about that. Because this new method of testing the fibers, they said was better. And it's more consistent. Blah, blah, blah. You know, we can testify, we can collect them, so on and so forth. Raman, the modern methods today, in terms of testing fibers, back in the day, I think in 96 to 97, they had polarized light microscopy, PLM, refractive index testing, and dye solubility. And these could say these fibers are consistent with this garment, but couldn't rule out many other garments of the same material. Modern theories today, or modern methods today, the Raman spectroscopy, it's a laser-based method that reads the chemical fingerprint of the fiber, and it can detect unique dye and polymer signatures. FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, provides complementary molecular information. This is a long word. Microspectrophotometry. Okay. Measures subtle variations in color absorptions more precise than human visual comparison. And mass spectrometry can analyze dyes and finishes at a molecular level. And together these give you a much finer discrimination, often enough to say these fibers are chemically indistinguishable from this shirt, and the probability of coincidence with another garment is very low. That's what we need. That's what we need. We need to retest that fiber in the shirt to say, okay, these fibers found under the long johns of JonBenet, we need that to say, okay, look, these are similar, period. These are what chemically indistinguishable from this shirt. We need that. That's what we need to be investing in. We should have done this a long time ago. See, look, if sometimes people do a lot of talking, but you put your money where your mouth is. We don't just let the cops do it. If you wanted to, you would. All this, oh, the police don't want to do it. I don't understand what the police are doing. Get it in the hands of all this. No, baby boy. You can say, hey, if I put the money up, can we test over here? That's what I would do. And I don't know why Boulder should be on top of this, quite honestly. Boulder should be on top. I can't lay all the blame on the Ramseys here. Boulder PD, I don't know what y'all are doing. Y'all should be on top of this stuff. At least look into the cost of it. But you probably don't want to spend your budget on it. That's probably what it is. You probably got other people to look at now, since, probably crime is on the rise with respect to that. So anyways, I was going to get down to the cost and then close this down. I was going to get to a cost and close this down. So, yes. DNA testing, if we do it at a real lab, a legit lab, you have some labs, but if we're looking at a legit lab, a certified FBI certified lab, probably looking at $2,000 to $5,000 per item. That's probably what we're looking at. So we got some 2 to 3 swabs on the long johns, 2 to 3 swabs on the bloomies, 3 to 4 swabs on the nightgown, JonBenet's blankets and covers, John's clothes, his shirts and his pants, Patsy's, her jacket, her top, her pants, and maybe Burke if his stuff was preserved. So probably 15 to 20 discrete samples. So the total cost of this would be probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. I mean, that's a lot of money, but it's doable. You know what I mean? It's a lot of money, but it's doable. But they probably, for your budget's like, man, well, I'm spending $100,000, 50 to $100,000 on testing for this, and it may not even work out. If we could get a GoFundMe going or something like that, with the police, and get some public support, man, that would be dope. And I'm pretty sure there'd be a lot of people who would pay for that. In terms of the fiber analysis, the Raman spectroscopy, FTIR MSP per sample, probably be around $500 to $1,500 per fiber batch, depending on complexity. If multiple garments are cross-compared, for example, fibers from JonBenet's long johns, Patsy's sweater versus John's shirt, labs may quote $2,000 to $5,000 per comparison. So for 10 to 15 fiber comparison sets, clothing to clothing, clothing to fibers recovered, you're looking at probably $25 to $50K. So that's an additional, $75 to $150K. Fluid identification and mixtures. I want to understand if we can identify these fluids to these covers, so we can get clarity on that. Body fluid ID, probably $200 to $500 per test. So if you have 10 to 12 question stains were tested, that's like $5,000. Okay, so this step is relatively cheap in comparison to everything else. So you're looking at about $90,000 to $175,000 for a timeline of 4 to 8 months from start to finish, just based on just estimating here, depending on backlog and mixture complexity. But 2 things that I would recommend that might make this more expensive. You have the top-notch lab, but you also have academic labs. And I'm getting ready to close. You have academic labs that can do this sort of same sequencing, I think, some of this technical work for much cheaper, like $600 to $1,000 per genome test. But it wouldn't hold in a criminal trial, right? But the thing is, if we want to be thorough in our testing, we would say, let's do them both. Let's just put up the money and do them both, right? Let's do the top notch for the FBI certified lab, and then get it backed up with an academic lab. Okay, that's what I would do. And so if we do both, the academic lab, so if we're doing just the forensic only, we're probably looking at $90,000 to $175K. And I think the academic secondary testing for a second check would probably push us up about 25 to 30 grand more. So we're probably looking at 110 to 200K. So realistically, we're probably looking at, maybe $150,000. Probably at the most, like, 200 grand. I mean, that's doable. With all the people who know about this JonBenet Ramsey case, just open it up to the public and say, they'll probably give $1 million. We need $1 million, everybody give $5, whatever. I mean, if we, okay, how many donors? If we put up $1 million, if everybody gives $5, we just need 200,000 donors. I'm pretty sure 200,000 people know about this case. We could get more than $1 million, put it in a fund, a DNA managed fund, a trust fund for JonBenet testing. Yo, we're good. Man. That's crazy. We could do it. I think we could do it. I think we just need to put it on the table. Somebody needs to organize it and just put it on the table and say, if everybody gives $5 on a GoFundMe, get a trust, an executor of a trust, and all the paperwork, the legal paperwork, we need to do that, and just start running these tests, because $1 million would we'd be able to test like different labs, right? We'd be able to say, okay, you guys run it, this university, you know, this FBI lab and this FBI lab, and bring it all together and say, okay, this is what we found. I think we should do that. And then start bringing in these genetic detectives. Yo, we could do that this year, man, quite honestly, or next. That's nothing. Next 2 or 3 years for the 4 to 8 month, raise the money in 2 to 3 months, and then 4 to 8 months, get it in the hands of people and get it tested, get a court order, get a judge to move the information over, move the items and the evidence over to these labs. It could be done, I'm telling you. But anyways, that's what I think. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, take it easy.